in 1994. From out of space comes a runaway planet, hurtling between the Earth and the Moon. Man's civilization is cast in ruin. 2,000 years later, Earth is reborn, a world of savagery, super science, and sorcery. But one man bursts his bonds to fight for justice. With his companions, Thundarr the Barbarian.
Listen up, because I'm about to tell you about one of the most criminally underrated cartoons of the 1980s. A show so good that it literally paved the way for He-Man, but got canceled anyway. I'm talking about Thundarr the Barbarian. Now, if you grew up in the early 80s, you might remember this show. Saturday mornings, ABC. A barbarian with an energy sword running around a post-apocalyptic Earth fighting wizards and mutants. It was basically Star Wars meets Conan, and it was absolutely incredible. But here's the thing. Despite having decent ratings, despite being created by some of the biggest names in comics and animation, and despite influencing an entire generation of action cartoons, Thundarr only lasted 21 episodes. 2 seasons. That's it. But get this. The reason it got canceled had absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the show or its ratings. The real story is way more frustrating than that. And it's a perfect example of how corporate decisions can kill even the best creative work. So today, I'm going to walk you through the incredible rise of Thundarr the Barbarian, the bizarre circumstances of its fall, and why this show deserves way more respect than it gets. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to be as angry as I am about what happened to this masterpiece. Now, before we dive in, let me give you some context about what made Thundarr so special. We're talking about a show that had Jack Kirby, yes, the Jack Kirby, the king of comics himself, doing production design. Alex Toth, the legendary animator behind Space Ghost, designing the main characters. And Steve Gerber, the guy who created Howard the Duck and Man-Thing, writing the stories. This wasn't some thrown together Saturday morning cash grab. This was a legitimate dream team of talent, creating something genuinely innovative. And here's what we're going to cover. First, I'll show you how this creative powerhouse came together and what made the show so groundbreaking. Then, we'll get into the corporate nonsense that killed it. And finally, I'll prove to you why Thundarr's legacy is still influencing content today, including a brand new comic series launching in 2026. Part 1. The creative genesis. So, let's start at the beginning. How does a show this good even get made in the first place? Picture this. It's 1980. Saturday morning cartoons are in a weird place. Networks are terrified of showing anything too violent because of all the parent groups complaining. Animation budgets are getting slashed left and right. Most studios are churning out the cheapest, safest content possible. And then, Ruby Spears Productions, founded by 2 guys who used to work for Hanna-Barbera, decides to do something completely different. Joe Ruby, one of the founders, had this philosophy. Shoot high. What kind of kid wants to be talked down to? That right there tells you everything you need to know about their approach. They weren't interested in making another Scooby-Doo clone. They wanted to make something that respected the intelligence of their audience. So they brought in Steve Gerber to develop the concept. Now, if you know Gerber's work from Marvel Comics, you know the guy didn't do simple. He did weird, subversive, complex storytelling, and he assembled a writer's room that included Roy Thomas, Mark Avanier, and Martin Pasco, all heavy hitters from the comic book world. But here's where it gets really interesting. For the visual design, they needed someone who could create a truly unique post-apocalyptic world. So they got Jack Kirby, the man who co-created the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Captain America, basically half of Marvel Comics. Kirby had already done a post-apocalyptic comic called Kamandi, so he knew this territory. But there was a problem. Kirby's art style, as incredible as it is on the comic page, is really complex. All those intricate details and explosive energy, that's expensive and time-consuming to animate. You can't just translate Kirby's style directly to Saturday morning TV without blowing your entire budget. So they brought in Alex Toth to design the main characters, and this was genius. Toth was the master of clean, simple character design. His work on Space Ghost and Birdman proved he knew how to create characters that were both visually striking and easy to animate. The result? Kirby designed the world, all the crazy ruins, the mutants, the wizards, the super science technology. And Toth designed Thundarr, Princess Ariel, and Ookla the Mock, with these clean, iconic silhouettes that could be animated efficiently. This collaboration, Kirby and Toth working on the same project, had never happened before, and hasn't happened since. It's the only time these two legends worked together, and that's why Thundarr looked like nothing else on TV. You had Kirby's boundless imagination creating this insane, post-apocalyptic landscape, combined with Toth's efficient, dynamic character work. It was the perfect marriage of ambition and practicality. Part 2, the world of 3994. But the creative team was only half the equation. The world they built was what really hooked viewers. Okay, so here's the setup, and it's beautifully simple. In 1994, a runaway planet passes between the Earth and the Moon. The Moon gets ripped in half. Civilization collapses. Fast forward 2,000 years to 3994, and Earth is now this wild mix of savagery, super science, and sorcery. Now, what made this brilliant was how they used real American landmarks as the backdrop. Thundarr and his crew, Princess Ariel the sorceress, and Ookla the Mock, this big furry brute, would travel through the ruins of places we all know. One episode, they're in the ruins of Manhattan, which they call Manhat. Another episode, it's Las Vegas. They did Mount Rushmore, the Alamo, Los Angeles. You'd see the Statue of Liberty half buried in sand, or the Hollywood sign all broken and overgrown. This was genius for two reasons. First, it made the world feel real and relatable. Kids watching could go, "Oh man, that's New York. That's what happened to New York." It grounded the fantasy in something familiar. Second, it created this perfect blend of the familiar and the alien. You'd see a recognizable landmark, but then there'd be a wizard living in it, or some mutant creature guarding it, or ancient technology that still worked but nobody understood anymore. And Thundarr himself, he's got this energy sword called the Sun Sword that can cut through anything. It's basically a lightsaber before lightsabers were cool. The show was clearly influenced by Star Wars. You've got the hero with the energy weapon, the princess, and the big furry sidekick, but they made it their own by setting it in this post-apocalyptic Earth. The stories were smart too. Thundarr hated sorcery. He was always yelling these great lines when he was surprised, very Conan-like. He trusted in his own strength and his sword. Ariel was the brains of the operation, always figuring out the history and the magic. And Ookla was the muscle, basically their Chewbacca. The world of Thundarr worked because it took complex ideas, post-apocalyptic survival, the clash between technology and magic, the fall of civilization, and made them accessible and exciting for a Saturday morning audience. It didn't talk down to kids. It challenged them to imagine what could happen to our world. Part 3, the success and the ratings. So with all this talent and all this creativity, the show must have been a massive hit, right? Well, here's where the story gets complicated. Thundarr premiered on October 4th, 1980 on ABC. It ran for 2 seasons, ending on October 31st, 1981. 21 episodes total. That's it. Now, here's the thing that makes this whole story so frustrating. The show got decent ratings. It wasn't a failure. People were watching it. Critics liked it. Kids loved it. In fact, the show was so popular that after ABC canceled it, NBC, their competitor, immediately picked it up for reruns. NBC ran Thundarr from April 1983 to September 1984. Think about that. A rival network saw enough value in this show to license it and run it themselves. That doesn't happen with shows that fail. That happens with shows that have a proven audience. The show also ran in syndication throughout the 90s on Cartoon Network and later on Boomerang in the 2000s. Multiple generations of kids discovered Thundarr through these reruns. It had staying power. So if the ratings were decent, if the show had an audience, if it was critically respected, why did it only last 21 episodes? The answer has nothing to do with the quality of the show or its performance. It has everything to do with corporate scheduling decisions and the business side of television. And that's what makes this story so infuriating. Part 4, the fall, the real reason for cancellation. Now we get to the part of the story that still makes me angry decades later. ABC canceled Thundarr the Barbarian for one specific reason. They wanted to make room in their Saturday morning schedule for a new show called Laverne and Shirley in the Army. Let me say that again. They canceled an original, critically acclaimed, well-rated action-adventure series to make room for an animated spin-off of a live-action sitcom. Laverne and Shirley in the Army was produced by Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears' main competitor, and it was exactly what it sounds like. They took the characters from the popular sitcom Laverne and Shirley and made a cartoon where they joined the Army. This was part of a trend in the early 80s where networks were obsessed with celebrity-driven cartoons. They thought if a show was popular in prime time, they could just make a cartoon version and it would automatically succeed. ABC looked at the success of the Laverne and Shirley sitcom and thought, this is a sure thing. We'll get all those Laverne and Shirley fans watching on Saturday morning. So they bumped Thundarr. An original creation with a dream team of talent behind it got pushed aside for a corporate synergy play. And here's the kicker. Laverne and Shirley in the Army bombed. It wasn't as popular as Thundarr. It didn't match Thundarr's ratings. The whole strategy failed. But by then, it was too late. Thundarr was gone. Now, there's another layer to this story that makes it even more frustrating. Merchandising. In the early 80s, the toy industry was just starting to figure out how powerful the connection between cartoons and action figures could be. But Thundarr was just a little too early to that party. Mego Corporation had the rights to make Thundarr action figures. They even made prototypes. There are pictures of an Ookla the mock figure that was designed but never produced. But Mego never actually released the toys. Without a toy line, Thundarr didn't have the merchandising revenue that could have kept it on the air. Compare that to what happened just 2 years later with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He-Man launched in 1983 with a massive toy line from Mattel, and that show ran for years because the toys were making so much money. So Thundarr fell victim to two things: bad corporate scheduling decisions and bad timing in the toy market. It was a creative success that got killed by business failures. And that's the most frustrating kind of cancellation, when it has nothing to do with the quality of the work. Part 5. The Legacy and Influence. But here's the thing about truly great creative work. It doesn't just disappear. Even though Thundarr only lasted 21 episodes, its influence on 80s cartoons is undeniable. When He-Man and the Masters of the Universe launched in 1983, it followed a very similar formula. Post-apocalyptic setting, barbarian hero with a magic sword, mix of technology and sorcery, colorful villains. Sound familiar? Thundarr proved that kids wanted this kind of content. It showed that you could do sophisticated world building and storytelling in a Saturday morning format. It demonstrated that the sword and sorcery genre could work in animation. And here's what's interesting. A lot of people who've gone back and watched both shows say Thundarr is actually better than He-Man. And you know why? Because Thundarr wasn't designed to sell toys. The writers could focus on telling good stories without having to feature specific characters or vehicles because Mattel needed to sell more action figures. Thundarr was pure creative vision, and that shows in the quality of the writing and the animation. The show has maintained a cult following for over 40 years now. It's consistently mentioned in lists of underrated 80s cartoons. People who remember it talk about it with this reverence, like they were part of a secret club that knew about this amazing show that nobody else appreciated. And the influence goes beyond just other cartoons. The whole aesthetic of post-apocalyptic fantasy, mixing high-tech ruins with primitive barbarism and magic, that's become a staple of genre fiction. You see it in video games, in tabletop RPGs, even in novels. Thundarr was one of the early templates for that. The legacy of Thundarr proves that quality work finds its audience eventually, even if it doesn't get the commercial success it deserves in its own time. Sometimes, being ahead of the curve means you don't get to reap the rewards, but you pave the way for everyone who comes after. Part 6. The Revival. And speaking of legacy, there's one more chapter to this story that proves Thundarr's value. In 2026, yes, next year, Dynamite Entertainment is launching the first ever Thundarr the Barbarian comic book series. And they're not messing around with this. They've got Jason Aaron writing it. If you don't know that name, he's one of the biggest writers in comics right now. He's done Thor, Wolverine, and let's not forget Star Wars. This is A-list talent. And they've got Kuber Ball on art, specifically chosen because he can capture the spirit of those original Kirby and Toth designs. The series is going to explore things the show never got to cover. Thundarr's origin story, how he met Ariel and Ookla, how he got the Sun Sword, all the backstory that the show never had time to tell. Think about what this means. 45 years after the show premiered, a major publisher is investing serious money and serious talent into expanding this universe. That doesn't happen with forgotten properties. That happens with properties that have proven lasting value. The fact that Thundarr is getting a high-profile comic book revival in 2026 is the ultimate validation. It proves that the creative vision of Steve Gerber, Jack Kirby, Alex Toth, and the whole Ruby Spears team was sound. The show didn't fail. The business side failed the show. So let's bring this all together. Thundarr the Barbarian was a creative triumph. It brought together some of the greatest talents in comics and animation to create something genuinely innovative and entertaining. It had decent ratings, a loyal audience, and critical respect. But it got canceled anyway, because ABC wanted to make room for a celebrity-driven cartoon that ended up failing. And it couldn't survive without a toy line, because it premiered just a couple years too early for the action figure boom. The show's cancellation wasn't a creative failure. It was a business failure. And that's the most frustrating kind of loss, because it was completely avoidable. But here's the silver lining. Thundarr's influence lived on. It paved the way for He-Man and every other sword and sorcery cartoon that came after. It maintained a cult following for decades, and now it's getting a proper revival with top-tier talent. The story of Thundarr the Barbarian is a reminder that sometimes the best creative work doesn't get the commercial success it deserves in its own time. But if it's truly great, it finds its audience eventually. Quality endures. And honestly, the fact that we're still talking about a 21-episode cartoon from 1980, that it's getting a comic book series in 2026, that people still remember it fondly after all these years, that's a better legacy than most shows that ran for 100 episodes ever achieve. So, if you enjoyed diving deep into the story of Thundarr the Barbarian, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this video to more people who remember this incredible show. And drop a comment below. I want to hear from you. Did you watch Thundarr back in the day? What was your favorite episode? Do you remember being confused when it just disappeared from the schedule? Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. By the way, I've read the great suggestions from you guys on which shows I should research next, so stay tuned. And if you want more deep dives into the forgotten gems of 80s pop culture, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.